flagship event, Global Strategic Threat Response GSTAR 2022. Ladies and gentlemen, the second session of GSTAR is titled Geoeconomics, Driver of the Asian Century. The conventional wisdom of the 21st century as being a decidedly Asian century corresponds with various tectonic shifts in the geoeconomics of the Asia-Pacific region. These shifts portend an increasing concentration of economic development and dynamism in Asia, but are accompanied by strategic level recalibrations of the world's major geoeconomic players in ways that are at times complementary, but at other times antagonistic. This GSTAR session looks at three core elements of geoeconomic concern in the Asian century and what they might mean for Pakistan and the whole world as on large. The three core elements are as follows. 1. The impact of great power rivalry in Asia-Pacific. 2. The geoeconomics of Asia-Pacific's rise. And 3. How to build peaceful regional connectivity and prosperity. Looking at these three facets of contemporary geoeconomics and drawing upon the insights of leading international thinkers, this session will offer a significant contribution to our understanding of the role that geoeconomics will play in the modern geostrategic environment. The moderator of the second session is Dr. Usman Chohan, who is Director Economics and National Affairs Development at Center for Aerospace and Security Studies. He is among the top 10 business authors out of 12,000 authors on the Social Science Network, which is the largest open repository in the world. He has published 4 books in the past 4 years. 1. Public Value and Budgeting, International Perspectives. 2. Reimagining Public Managers, Delivering Public Value. 3. Public Value and Digital Economy. 4th, Pandemics and Public Value Management. In the academic realm, his research has been cited widely, as for example in the World Trade Organization, the European Parliament, the National Bureau of Economic Research, IEEE, and the OECD, among many others. And Dr. Chohan has testified before various authorities based on his technical expertise. Dr. Chohan's forthcoming 5th book is titled Activist Retail Investors and the Future of Financial Market, while his forthcoming 6th book is titled Public Value and the Post-Pandemic Society. So without any further delay, I would request the session moderator to take over the proceedings.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Honored guests, excellencies, foreign representatives, members of the civil and bureaucracy, military officials, Moeed Yusuf Saab, my esteemed panelists both here and online, our large viewership on YouTube and those tuning in via Zoom, Assalamu alaikum. It is my supreme pleasure to welcome you all to the second session of GSTAR 2022. This one is about geoeconomics. It is something that I have been thinking about very deeply for a long time, and I have assembled the best people online and in person to guide our understanding of the subject. We will see from a multifaceted perspective what geoeconomics is and what it might be. I'm actually a double agent today because I'm not just moderator, I'm laying the groundwork for what I think we should talk about. I would request my slides, please, so that we can come to a common general understanding of the contours of geoeconomics. So, a stellar panel, as you have seen all over the signboards and placards, with different perspectives. What I want to get to is what is geoeconomics as I would interpret it, and then others will give you better definitions and understandings. Why is geoeconomics an orphaned subject? Have you ever met somebody who calls themselves a geoeconomist? I mean, for so long I have been working on this subject, but I wouldn't tell you I'm a geoeconomist. Why? What does it mean? Why is it important for us? And then what I perceive as a great realignment. Okay, this is where Session 2 and Session 1 may have divergence of opinions considerably. Geoeconomics is taking your strategic worldview and your economic interests and sublimating them into common objectives. Okay, so that seems pretty easy to do, but you'd be surprised, not everybody's very good at it. Part of the reason is because it is an orphan subject. So your IR specialists look at economics in a cursory manner, non-expert manner, but the economists are worse because they don't believe that your strategic interests and your economic interests should be one and the same, because the state should not be interfering in the market, or the market should not be driving what the state cares about. So there's an ideological gap, and yet it is very important. So if it is an orphaned subject, then some people do it well and some people don't. If I look at this map of the outlines of countries, I would tell you that China does it very well, because they have a special relationship between the state and the market. Their largest juggernauts are state-owned enterprises, so they can find a common alignment between what is market-driven interests, as insofar as they may be defined, and the state-driven objectives. So it's done. Russia does this very well too, but they also have an interesting relationship between the state and the market, because in an oligarchic structure, those meld into a kind of uniform pattern. And Russia has used aggressively, offensively and defensively its geoeconomics, some of which we have seen in 2022. Iran is another example, but it's also a weird exception if you think about it, because it is a country under immense strain and sanctions. So whatever the market can accomplish has to be done with the benevolence of the state. Now, are regular countries or countries in normal peacetime conditions comparable to this? Maybe, maybe not. I'll give you another example. India has great aspirations to be a geoeconomics player, but it does it very poorly. I'll give you two examples. Nepal, they had used the geoeconomic approach and they basically suffocated the country and still didn't get what they wanted. Another example, in Afghanistan, they tried to put in all this money, and what did they have to show for it at the end of the day? So they aspire to do that, but they're not very good at it. And then there is the United States, where, as I had mentioned, the ideological barrier, the state and the market, you basically have two opposing capitals which follow different logics. You have the New York community and you have the Washington community. And for the last 35 years, the economic community had pushed harder. They said Peking would fall into a similar pattern to Seoul and Taipei, that you go for the economics first and then you'll get your strategic stuff. But the strategic folks in Washington said, okay, you've had 35 years and it's not happening. So now it's our turn to dictate things. Now, that makes it seem as if having a uniform state-market relationship is a good thing, because if you have a diversity of opinions, you get clouded judgments, the community is fine. But there's a counter-argument there too. The counter-argument is that if you are all on one page, you could all be on the wrong page. So it's actually good to have a diversity of opinion. Maybe New York people are right for something and Washington are right for something. So you can argue it either way, but as far as geoeconomics goes, a state-market relationship has to be formed where they come to mutual understandings, otherwise they follow different logics. This is a slide particularly for the foreign participants and observers and speakers, that in the four movements that have happened since 1945 that are most important, Pakistan has played a very important role, but that role was driven largely by a strategic calculus. Economics played second fiddle to that. Decolonization, it was a moral case to do it. We were liberators of countries from A to Z, from Algeria to Zimbabwe. You didn't get any economic benefits from that per se. Similarly, the Cold War, there was a strategic logic, but the economy didn't aside from like foreign aid and stuff, which is not really a good thing in the long run, you didn't gain much from that. The war on terror, we are still paying the price for that. The economics of that, it's a very heavy legacy, and maybe it'll take a generation or two to wash that burden and that trauma. And what they call Cold War II, I don't like this terminology, but in this new confrontation, can it be different? Dr. Mueid Yusuf has been instrumental in arguing that we need to have a geoeconomics component. It should take primacy, or it should be at least as important as geostrategy, and so maybe this next episode will be different, and he can guide our understanding on that. But what you see because of that is that you have sort of opposing logics within societies, especially something like the United States, but even us. And so if you look at this map, if you have two superpowers on the left and right, there are some countries that have very clear strategic plus economic alignment. Russia is very much into China, particularly after 2022. Iran, it really at the $400 billion deal they signed with China. I mean, it's very clear that strategic and economic that side. India is it's getting greater clarity because it does have a healthy trade balance with or a large trading relationship with China, but its interests are very much in the US camp. The problem is everybody else is having a very hard time. For example, Australia has a very strong economic relationship with China, but its strategic and defense interests are entirely with the United States. And we are, to some extent, a mirror image of that, because our largest importing partner is the United States. A very large trading relationship, but our defense inclination is China plus the United States. So, and the same can be said for Canada on the Australian side. So a lot of prosperity created by cooperating with China economically, but defense, it's just natural that they would have an affinity with the United States. Singapore is a great example where it's benefited from both sides, and it wouldn't want to make this choice. Nobody would want to make this choice. But the balance between strategic and economic is really what we're talking about. These choices aren't easy, and as the first session, the very articulate speakers covered, nobody wants to make this choice. They're arguing they don't want to force, the powers say that they don't want to force this choice, but it's in the background. You can't really, gloss over it. Ideally, nobody would have to make these choices, but just remember that in this period, a century ago, so as the second quarter of the 20th century was beginning, there were lots of realignments happening. Some regretted it, some gained disproportionately from it, and so history will be the judge. I don't think it's very good for anybody to be forced to choose sides, personally. Now, the problem is that it's very hard to think long-term like this when your society, as well as all other societies, go through sequences of crises, and it appears, at least viscerally, that the kinds of crises occurring in the world are accelerating. We've had 4 crises in 4 years, and we've done a good job resolving them or moving past them. For example, in 2019, there was the India-Pakistan standoff, and it was the Pakistan Air Force that excelled in its duties, neutralized the target, captured a pilot, gave it back as an act of mercy. Crisis solved, but that could have been a very big deal. 2020 was the COVID-19 pandemic. Oh, that was terrible, but again, Pakistan did an extremely good job because of a multi-stakeholder effort. Everybody is cooperating, civil society, political, bureaucratic. It's a remarkable job, thank God. 2021, the fall of Kabul, it could have been really, really messy, but I'm glad that there's not millions of refugees on our streets right now, but you never, and then we have the floods in 2022. So when you are firefighting non-stop, you kind of lose sight of the big picture. We in think tanks are privileged to have a little bit of that calm, but we are always also keeping attuned to the urgent as opposed to the important. Okay. The thing is, we're not the only victims here. I don't want to play the victim here. The problem is that the world is in a big crisis, series of crises, and it has a very big intergenerational impact, which is why I've invited Professor Moore, who is an expert on intergenerational aspects, to comment on it too. In this meme, Gen Z is now bracing for a global recession. The writing is on the wall. We're expecting something bad to happen. It's very rational to be afraid. And then us millennials, which are people in their 30s, approaching 40, we say, oh, is it your first time? I mean, I joined equity finance in 2008, 6 months before Lehman collapsed. I've seen the whole thing. It's, so if this is the kind of aggression that the mind has to deal with, then you can't deal with sobriety with the complexity. And the truth is that even the people in charge everywhere are not doing a very good job. The best they can do for you is tell you, instead of a recession, that it's a growth stage, it's a transition without much growth. That's how they're dancing around the issues. So global leadership does not assure the youth of today in any country So in a shattered world or shattering world, how do we find the compassion and lucid thinking to have geoeconomics, trade, cooperation, integration take primacy again? And the people who are paranoid or the people who are a little jittery have reason to be so. And I think that as new generations come to the fore, they need to somehow keep that sang-froid to be able to make this world a better place, and cooperation is the answer. That's my sort of background for it. Now let's get the real stuff.